Hi there, this is Andy Ching and welcome back to the Agile Arcade, the channel where we break down Agile, Jira and Atlassian tools without all the corporate buzzword bingo. At least that is the intention. In today's vid, we're going to be taking a quick tour of Jira Spaces, previously known as Projects. And if you've opened Jira recently and wondered, hang on a minute, where did all my projects go? Well, don't worry, nothing's actually disappeared. But Atlassian did rename them, and there's actually a pretty good reason why. So today what we'll cover is a little on why projects became spaces, when you should create a space, team versus company managed spaces, and a quick tour of the key sections you'll find inside a space. By the end of this video, you should have a good understanding of how spaces work and how to structure them sensibly. And remember, you can check out my Getting Started with Jira video if you are completely new to the product. Let's roll into that first section. So, what is a Jira space? Well, at its core, a space is the main container for work inside Jira. Inside a space, you'll find things like your issues, which are your stories, your tasks, your bugs, whatever you want. Your boards, which is where the team will manage the work, i.e. where the issues are moved around and their statuses. Your backlogs, which is where your upcoming work lives and your priorities get done. Reports and metrics to help monitor progress. Automation rules, where you can set up macros, including the ability to create alerts. Your workflows and configurations, this is the admin section and contains the DNA of your space. In other words, all the ins and outs of your space. In simple terms, a space is basically a workspace for a team, a product, or a service. And if we liken that to an arcade theme, look, I have to find a tenuous link somewhere, so just bear with me. It will make sense, I promise. You can think of it like this. A space is the actual arcade cabinet itself, and inside the cabinet are the rules, the scoreboard, the players, and of course the game itself. So everything related to that particular team or product lives inside that cabinet. Now, why did Atlassian rename projects to spaces? Well, for years in Jira, these were called projects, which honestly caused quite a lot of confusion because most Jira projects weren't really projects at all. Many organisations use Jira for long-running products or teams, not temporary initiatives, and I've certainly used it in that way for the most part. In fact, a short-lived project is something I've only ever really used sporadically. So, for example, you might have a platform team, a payment service, a mobile app, a customer support queue. None of these things are really projects in the traditional sense. They're ongoing spaces where work happens continuously. Another reason for the rename is consistency across the Atlassian tool. So if you've ever used Confluence before, you'll know it already uses the term spaces to organise knowledge. So aligning Jira with that concept makes the ecosystem just that little bit easier to understand. So in short, the new name better reflects how teams will actually engage and use Jira. So when should you create a space? Well, now this is an area where things can go wrong pretty quickly. One of the biggest mistakes organisations often make is creating far too many spaces. There are three common and I think sensible patterns which I consider when creating a new space. First up, team spaces. One of the most common setups is a team-based space. This is how I've typically used Jira over the years. So for example, a platform team, a payments team, a mobile squad, whatever it happens to be. Everything that team works on lives inside that space. This works particularly well when a team owns a clear domain or service. Second, product spaces. Another option is organising spaces around products or platforms. So for example, mobile app, data platform, customer portal. Multiple teams might contribute to the same space, but the work is organised around the product or products themselves. And then the third option ultimately is service or support spaces. Jira is also widely used for service management or support workflows. So examples could include customer support, DevOps, IT, help desk, incident management. In these cases, the spaces act as the ticket hub for requests and incidents. I've seen all of these use cases used extensively and often within the same organisation. A quick warning though, what you generally don't want to do is to create a new space for every single initiative. So something like a new feature, a new release, a temporary project, those are usually just better handled with epics, components and labels rather than just spinning up a new space every single time. Otherwise what you end up with ultimately is dozens of half-empty spaces which become very, very hard to manage. That is just not what you're going to want. So before we move on, there's also one important thing you'll notice when creating a new space in Jira. You will be asked whether you want to create a team-managed space or a company-managed space. Now, a team managed space in this context doesn't relate to a space dedicated to a team as described just a moment ago. What it relates to is the type of space that you're creating and the level of rigor and autonomy that you want to put around it. So I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. But this choice actually matters, and it matters quite a lot. So let's quickly break down the differences between team managed spaces and company managed spaces. A team managed space is ultimately designed to be very simple and self-contained. The team that will own that space can configure things like issue types, workflows, fields, and boards. And when they're doing that, they won't need any help from a Jira administrator whatsoever. Everything is local to that space, meaning any changes that you make won't have any impact elsewhere in Jira. And these spaces are really great when you've got a team that is really asking for independence, you're experimenting with processes, you want minimal admin overhead. You might have a smaller team that just really needs to get started quite quickly. Think of it as a self-service environment for a team. The trade-off, however, is that they can become a little harder to standardize across an organization and more difficult to report out of because they are self-contained and can be set up in many different ways. A company managed space is much more centrally focused. These spaces will typically share their workflows, their issue types, their fields, their screens and permissions across multiple spaces. This ultimately allows organizations to enforce consistent standards, and they're really ideal when multiple teams need the same processes or you want to have some degree of central governance. Reporting needs to be consistent across the teams. That's a really important one, and it might be that Jira is being used at enterprise scale and you enact the reasons above. A trade-off with this is that they usually require help from a Jira admin to make the setup and also to make changes. A simple rule of thumb is this: team managed spaces optimize for flexibility, company managed spaces optimize for consistency. Neither is inherently better, it really just depends on how your organization works. But remember, you can't move a team-based project to a company project later or vice versa, the former request being quite common actually as teams grow. You'd need to start a new project and then migrate the data, and this can be fairly involved and may need an admin to do it for you. Let's think about a real world example for just a second then. A small product squad might be experimenting with their workflow. They might ultimately then prefer a team managed space, but a large engineering organization with dozens of teams might prefer company managed spaces. So things like their issue types and their reporting all stay consistent and the nomenclature stays all consistent. This obviously will require some degree of upfront definition, but once set up, it can be really quick to roll out and much easier to maintain. One quick tip here: if you're running Jira across a large organization, it's usually worth agreeing a standard approach pretty early on. Mixing too many different project types can make reporting and administration quite a bit harder later on, and trust me, I am talking from experience here. Team managed spaces are much harder to report on given their inconsistent nature, so you may agree that team managed spaces can only really be used for light work when tracking and reporting is not required at a company level, or perhaps not even at all, and you can actually turn them off in the main administration. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and create a space. I'm just going to run you through the space creation wizard so you can see what steps there are in there, and I can just talk through some of the options that we've got. Once that's set up, we'll then run through a bit of a tour of the spaces, and I can show you some of the key features based on some of the things we've already spoken about, some things you may not know about. So on the left hand side is your navigation menu in Jira, and you can see here we've got this item called Spaces. This would have been called Projects before. If you've used Jira in the past, you might be looking for projects. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it's now called Spaces. Something that still catches me out even now, and it's been around a little bit of a while. We can click on more spaces and we can see what obviously spaces we've already got, and we can search for any. So if we're in a big org, we might have a big old list of spaces, and we can go to a different screen and view all our spaces on there as well if we want to, but we're not going to do that right now. What we're going to do is create a new space. Okay, now on the left hand side here we've got a number of templates, and generally speaking what these will do is they will give you some sort of default options out of the box and set your boards up how you want. We are just going to go for a software development one here. And the nice thing about Jira now, you can see the sort of expansion that they want to encourage from Atlassian, which is that you can use Jira for all sorts of different things if you want to. You can even create a personal one here if you'd like as well. But we're going to keep it simple. I'm going to go for software development. And then we've got a number of options here as well. So we can go from something like top level planning, we can do a Kanban, we can do a Scrum, prioritization, product roadmap. Now, if you know what you want here, then great. You'll notice at the bottom here, there are some options, some product identifiers. So these top four along along this row here, we know that we can use these because they're all in Jira. These four here would require us to have something called Jira Product Discovery, which is a separate tool that sits alongside. We can also do some bug tracking as well. That is also available to us. But we're going to go for something quite straightforward. We're going to go for Scrum. We've got an option to use a template if we want to. So if you've got other projects set up, you can use a template. So you can base it on a previous project if you like. But for us, we're going to create something brand new. So we're going to call this Jira Space Creation Demo. You can see it creating the board on the left-hand side there, on the right-hand side, sorry. And you can see here as well that it's also given us a key. Now we can change this key later on if we want to, if we don't like it. Obviously, it's not the most catchy key and space name ever, but we'll go with it. And this is where we get the option here for team managed or company managed projects. Spaces. I reserve the right to use that term interchangeably. Apologies for that. So team managed space or company managed space. And you can see here, team managed, as we mentioned before, for teams who want to control their own working process and practice in a self-contained space. And company managed for teams who work with others across many spaces in a standard way. And typically speaking, I will usually use a company managed space, and we'll have a number of workflow schemes and custom field schemes and all of permission schemes. All of those kind of things will be defined, and then we will just apply those at for each project. So we're going to go company managed. And here you've got an option that says share settings with an existing project. So this is where, if you've defined all of your workflows and all of your schemes and everything else like that, what you can, and you've set that against a particular space, and you'll notice here it says with an existing project. Naughty Atlassian, they've not updated all of their language. We can just pick that from this list. So if I click on this, and you can see, oh, I've got no options at the moment. So I suspect that the other space that I've got in here actually is a team managed one. But if I had other projects/spaces, oh, Atlassian, you're interchangeably using it yourself and you're making me make mistakes here, then they will appear in that list. And when you do that, it will take all of those workflows and those permission schemes and fields and everything else, screens, all of that stuff will then get included in your space. But we're not going to do that because there aren't any options, and we're going to just create something fresh. We click next. So what it's going to use is it's going to use all of the Jira default schemes and workflows and create us a new space. Now, if there are some people that we want to add to our space, we can add them, but I have no friends in here, so I'll do that later. Okay, and there we go, and that's our board created. So what that's done for us now is that's created a Scrum board, and because we created a Scrum project, if we use Kanban, we would have had a Kanban board in here, and all of those things as well. So next up, what we're going to do is I'm going to talk through each of these sections in a little bit more detail, just so you know where to find things and you can get yourself started with your newly created space. So if we click onto our space on the left-hand side, so once we've found our space, we click on it, it's going to bring us through to this active sprints area here. But I'm going to talk through some of the options, not all of the options on the top here, but the ones I think are probably most important for you. And we'll also go through some of the settings for the particular space as well. So if we start on the left-hand side with summary, that is going to show us all of the information at a high level that someone like a stakeholder or manager might be interested in seeing, and obviously you might be interested in looking at this as a member of the team as well. It's going to show you things like your breakdown of work, what things have most recently been going on, whether you've got any who's assigned to what issue types you've got, all of those sorts of things, and it gives you a very quick overview of the heartbeat of that particular space at any one moment. We've also got the ability here to select some filters here. So if we click on assignee, It's not really going to show us very much at the moment, obviously, because we haven't actually got anything in here to show you because we've just created the space. If we then look at the next section, which is I'm just going to skip across a few now. So we've got our active sprint, which is the default screen you're going to come to. And as your work starts to appear in here, you're going to see all of your tickets appearing in these different columns here. Now, these different columns will map to statuses within your workflow. And in fact, if you go up here to your board settings, and then you go over to your layout and then look at columns, you can see here that we've got a very simple workflow. We've got 3 steps: to do, in progress, and done, and we can map those. If we add a status, we can also, if we've got other statuses in our workflow that aren't mapped, we just literally drag and drop those across onto those columns, or we can create a brand new column to map that status on its own. We can also add constraints in here, so we could say things like we only want 3 issues in there, or we, whatever. We can talk about excluding subtasks if we want to. You can also have swim lanes, which are typically based on, usually based either on stories or a query. So you might say, give me a swim lane of everything that is super high priority, and you can add that, and it will add a swim lane along the top where all of the high priority stuff will appear in that swim lane. Which is really useful. And there's loads of other options in here, and one day we will go back and have a look a little bit more at how you can set your board up. But most of the default settings in here will be what you need to get you started on day one. If we go back to the board and then we skip back another step here and we go to our backlog, what our backlog is basically everything that exists within that space will appear in our backlog. So all our stories, all of our bugs, everything at that level in our hierarchy will appear in there. And we also got our epics. So the default is that the parent to a story is an epic. You can create a different hierarchy if you want to, but ultimately stories relate to epics. And we can show our epic panel on the left hand side here, and all of our epics will appear, and it's essentially like a filter select. So if we've got, for instance, 10 stories that associate with an epic, that epic will appear here, and if we click on that epic, it will filter all the stories onto the right hand side. So it just helps us to organize things a little bit and visualize things in different ways. We've also got the ability to add quick filters along the top here as well. So we might add things like assignee, we might add stuff based on priority, whatever we want. So we just click on a button, click on our quick filters, and then we can add an additional quick filter to say show me everything that is high priority along the top here. Now you can see here we've got 2 boxes. We've got our backlog. So our backlog is where all of the stuff is that's unassigned to a sprint. And we've got our sprint here. So what we can do is take everything that's in our backlog here and drag and drop that into our sprint. Now this first sprint that you get will be active straight away. So you can see the start sprint's already grayed out. And we can create additional sprints. If we want to create our next sprint, we can click the create sprint there, and it will just increment the number there, and we can drag issues into there. What you can also do if you've got your backlog is if you've got 50 things in your backlog here, you can just grab this little bar here and you can just drag it over the top of all of your issue types. And for instance, you might say I've got 200 story points available in my sprint, and if all of your stuff in your backlog at the top of your backlog is all estimated, you can just drag that bar over until you reach 200. So it's nice and easy to put things into the sprint. Or you can also drag and drop them, and if we had things in here to show you, you can also right click them and assign them directly to a sprint as well. So we can go through to our board and end the sprint if we want to. I can't end it at the moment, we haven't got anything in it, but ultimately we can end the sprint here, and then in the backlog we can click start and generate the new sprint there as well. We can also create issues here. You can see this has popped up here, so if we want to create a test story, do that. We can create an epic here. Let's just do that. Let's create an epic. Create that there as well. And what we could also do is we can drag that onto there. So that story is now part of that epic. And actually what we can do is we can select that. We can select no epic or first epic. If we unselect that, click no epic, that's going to disappear because we haven't got anything that's assigned to no epic, so that's really useful. We can click on this one and that will show us all the stuff that's on that epic. And as I mentioned before, we can obviously drag and drop things around, so I can take that out of the sprint if I want to. I can pop it back into the next sprint if I want to. So just grab that there, pop it in there. So there's lots of flexibility to move things around, and we're going to start our sprints in here as well. So once this previous sprint is finished, we can then start our next sprint. So that's your board, and that's where all your prioritization is going to take place. So you're going to, everything that sits at the top of this backlog is ultimately what you would consider to be the next next things that you want to be working on. And everything that's at the bottom is typically going to be lower priority. So it's where a quick filter with the priority is really, really useful, because you might say, show me everything that's really, really low, select it all, say move it to the bottom of the backlog, and all of your low priority stuff will move to the bottom, and anything obviously that was sitting at the bottom will then naturally move up a little bit. So that's quite a good way of organizing things if you've got some good indication of what the priority of those items are, and then obviously within that you can then prioritize. When you're high priority, you can then pick which ones are the really high priority things. Okay, so moving along the top here then, so obviously we mentioned our active sprints, we've got our reports here, loads and loads of reports that you can generate. A few that are I find particularly useful, things like your burn downs. So you can get a burn down chart of your sprint, and that will show you, basically it'll give you a line saying this is where you should be tracking, and it'll show all the work getting completed down throughout that. So a burn down is a really useful thing to use in a daily stand-up. It'll tell you whether you're off track or not straight away there and then, and you can question the team as to what it is that we need to do to try and get ourselves back to where we need to be. Velocity chart is also something else that's really, really useful. It will tell you what your team committed to versus what they ended up delivering. And it will break down, you'll be able to see straight away, how consistent that velocity is. So if your team is capable of delivering 200 points, you'll see how much they actually ended up delivering within that particular, from one sprint to the next. So the more sprints you deliver, the better your velocity chart will be. You've got your sprint report as well, which is also a really, really useful report that I use quite a lot. This will tell you, it'll give you your burn down for the whole sprint, a bit of a sprint summary essentially. It'll also tell you what work's been added to that sprint, what work's been removed from that sprint, so you can get a general feel for things like scope change and that kind of thing as well. There's a whole bunch of other things as well that you can do down here, and a lot of this will be query based. We will touch on that on another day. Under your development and code, if you've got a link to GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, which is Atlassian's own tool for managing software, managing code, then you can start to see how all your work is being managed. When you commit code to your repository, if it's hooked up to Jira, then when you do your commit statements, you can put your Jira ticket reference in there, and it will basically bring all of that information into here as well. And it's really useful because ultimately it means that you can have a look at a ticket and it will show you all of the work that's been done for that particular ticket. So it's a great way of keeping track of things, especially later on down the line. If you have a problem, you can go back and you can have a look at that and say, oh, right, okay, we changed this bit of code here. We know when that happened, we know who made the change, so we can start to investigate what might have happened. We've got releases. So if you're using named releases, you can create those in here. So we can create a new release and we can call it whatever we want to. We can give it some dates. And then within the tickets themselves, if we go back to our board here, we can click on our ticket and we can set a fixed version if it's on here. It may not be. Oh, there it is, fixed version. And we can select version 1. And that means then we can have a look at the releases page and we can see version 1 there. We can see the progress of it at a high level. We can click into it. It'll show us all the things that belong to that particular release or version or deployment or whatever you want to use it for. Okay, and then the only other thing really of note probably is the pages section. So if you've got pages and you're using Confluence, you can give yourself some pages set up in here. So if you've got any documentation that you want to associate with your particular space, then you can create those in here as well. So it does mean that you've got a one-stop shop for your space within Jira, including any kind of related, things like decisions, meeting notes, whatever you want. You can pop those in here as well. I've seen product requirements used quite a lot in there. That is something that I see pretty frequently within a space. It may be that you don't want to use this feature and you'll just link straight out to Confluence, and just all of your documentation may well just be there. Okay, so that is a kind of high level of most of the things that you're going to need to care about, and we can cover some of these other ones in detail another time. But let's just have a quick look now at the setup for our space. So if we go over here onto the left hand side and we click on the little ellipse there, we can go to our board settings. So we looked at these earlier, and we can also, if we go up a level to here, so this is our space. So you can see if you fold this out here, I should have said this earlier, if you fold out your space here, you can see any boards that you've created. So you don't just have to have one board. If you've got, say for instance, you're a team-based space, you might have 4 or 5 different boards for different scrums, for instance, and they might be set up slightly differently. They might have different mappings, or they might have a different estimation method. Whatever it happens to be, that's fine. And you'll see all of those appearing down here underneath your space. If you click on the little ellipse on the actual space itself, you get a few more options here. So you've got the ability to add people. So you can add some people to your space if you want to. You might have different roles within that space, and you can set that up if you want. You can even set up a space background, and if you're using Enterprise, you can even save it as a template. That's not something I have set up, so we can't do that right now. If we go into space settings, and this is the DNA of our space here. So on the left hand side here are all the things that make this space this space. So we can come back in here, we can change the name of it and the space key if we want to. If we've got a URL to a website, or it might be to a Confluence space, or whatever it happens to be, we can absolutely do that as well. We can change the owner, we can set a default with signing up if we want to, add a description, and we can also set categories as well. So we might say this is a team space, a product space, a function space if we want to at that high level, or whatever we choose, and we can just manage the categories here and create as many categories as we want to. I would suggest keeping that fairly simple, and you'll notice here you see how your space is managed, Jira Software Project. We cannot change that. If we go to summary, and this is the page that I typically will use the most, summary is going to give us a very high level view of all of the things that we really care about within our space. So it's going to tell us what our issue types are, our work types. So we've got bug, epic, story, subtask, and task, and that's default, and it's called something. It's the Scrum issue type scheme. Something, again, one day we'll cover how schemes are set up in Jira. It's pretty straightforward. We could then use, if we wanted to, we could use that scheme in another project. So when it asked us which project we want to use as the basis for our new, space, I keep doing that, our new space, we could just say use the Jira Space Creation Demo space, and it will bring all of these schemes in underneath it. And if we then change these schemes later on, it will change for all of the spaces that are using that particular scheme. Got our priorities, so you have the ability to set different priorities from one space to the next using priority schemes. We've got our workflows, so if we just drill into our workflow, we've got a very, very simple workflow here, which just says to do, in progress, and done. Obviously we can then edit that, add extra steps, do some transitions in there, add rules, all of those sorts of things. And I will do a video on setting up workflows and some of the things to consider and some of the traps that you can fall into. And I will be doing that very, very soon. So we close out of that. We've come all the way back out again. So let's go back out here, click on our little ellipse again, go to space settings, go back into summary. So it takes a moment. Apologies for the flash of white there for a second. We've also got our screens here, so the ability to set up screens, and the screen schemes are a little bit complicated. We have something called a screen scheme, and we have something called an issue type screen scheme. So I will talk to you about those in another day. They're quite hard to explain, but essentially think of it this way. You've got your different issue types. If we scroll into this here, we've got we can have a screen scheme based on our issue type. So we've got a Scrum default screen scheme, which is used for our story, our epic, our task, and our subtask. And then we have a different screen scheme, which is used for bugs. And then all of that together makes up a Scrum issue, well, in this particular instance, an issue type screen scheme. Within the screen schemes themselves, well, basically what you have here is 3 core actions: create issue, edit issue, and view issue. And then underneath that, you can have different screens. And all a screen is in Jira is just a collection of fields. So for instance, for create, you might want to have a smaller subset of fields than you do for edit, or you might have a different screen that you use for view. So basically, you've got a bit of a hierarchy here. You have these issue type screen schemes, which group together the screen schemes, which is a bunch of screens for a bunch of particular issue types, and then there's fields underneath. Okay, so let's go back up the summary one more time. Down here we've also got the other thing is our fields. Most projects will just use the standard system default field configuration. If you want to set your fields up in a different way, if you want different fields and you only want them available for certain projects, you can go and create a new field configuration. Generally speaking, I don't find that there's a lot of reason to do that. I think most of the time you're just going to add fields to the default field configuration and you don't have to worry about it. Especially for smaller ones, just not something to worry about. Other things to consider on the left-hand side here, we spoke about versions already, so we saw that at the top. We can have those fixed versions there. We have the ability to do automation from here. So we click into automation. This essentially allows us to create macros to do some automation. And there's some wizards here for setting up some automation, so you don't have to know how to do it. But again, I will talk you through how the automation feature works in a later video, so stay tuned for that. Probably the only other thing really that you're going to want to care about in the early stages is your people tab. And this is where you can add people to your project. Depending on how you've got your project set up and your permissions, will depend on who can see it, who can access it, who has administrator rights, all of those kind of things. And we can add people at the top here. We can pick them by name, and then we can pick a role. And at the moment, we've only got an administrator role for that particular project, but you can create additional roles in the main administration section of Jira. So appreciate that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the administration of your space, and hopefully you won't need too much from this. If you want to do something a little bit more complex, you're a little bit nervous about going and creating the schemes and the workflows, maybe consider using a team managed project, but bear in mind that you won't be able to then change that team managed project to a company managed one later on. So you may just have to migrate from one to the other. Okay, so ultimately that is it. Some other things that you might be interested in, things like the calendar. You can set, you'll see any kind of dates that it picks up. So fixed versions or anything else like that, key milestones, release deadlines, anything else like delivery dates, anything else like that will appear on there. You can also use the timeline feature, which sort of represents that in a slightly different way. And you can give start and end dates to things, and you get sort of a Gantt chart appearing in there as well, which is also quite useful. Okay, so there we go then. That is Jira Space 101. Before we wrap up, there's a few quick tips that you should remember. First, keep your spaces simple. Try to align them to teams or products, not temporary work. Secondly, avoid overcomplicated workflows. The more complex your workflow becomes, the harder it is for teams to use Jira effectively. This is really important. We'll cover that workflow creation and setup in a future session, as I mentioned before. And third, don't create a space when a board filter might actually solve the problem for you. Often a new board or just a new view of the data is all that you really need. So that's it. That's a quick tour of Jira Spaces, what they are, why the name changed and how they're structured. Spaces are really the foundation of how Jira organizations work, or how Jira organizes work, I should say. If you get your space structure right from the get-go, everything else will just become easier. Your boards, your automation, your reporting, scaling your teams. all of that becomes easier. And in upcoming videos, we will take a deeper look at things like the Jira boards, workflows, filters, and also that automation as well. If you found this useful, give the video a like and consider subscribing to the Agile Arcade for more Jira and Agile content. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.